Hi everyone, welcome to episode 6 of the virtual coffee break. Today, Karina and I will be discussing selling on Amazon as a seller and expanding into Europe and the key considerations for such a strategy. Karina, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hi everyone, and I've got my coffee. I've feeling it today. I've got that Friday feeling, but I'm also got that slow Friday feeling as well.
Need your hit of caffeine then, right?
Yes, so you might find that I'm going to gradually start getting a bit more hyped up through our chat this morning.
You'll speak faster. You'll speak faster. Brilliant. Okay, so this is a really interesting subject, and one again that we probably discuss quite a lot on a weekly basis with some of our current clients, potential clients. So, Karina, if we were a seller and we were wanting to expand into Europe, what would you regard as the 5 key considerations for that process?
Yeah, so first off, I would say the first key consideration is all about fulfillment and understanding what countries you're going to sell into. Because when we're talking about Amazon Europe, at the moment we're talking about the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. We've now got this addition, we've got the Netherlands, and possibly some more countries on their way. So a lot of businesses will then think, well, I want to sell in all countries because, of course, all these countries, selling in all countries, there's going to be more customers. But it's really important that you understand what that actually means, selling in all. Because in Europe, there's a different language in every single country. Every country has different rules, as it were. And so it's about understanding that. So before you even start deciding what country, I would actually make sure that you're very clear as a seller on how Amazon fulfillment works on Seller Central, because there are 3 fulfillment methods available to sellers in Europe. There's the standard, what they call EFN, European Fulfillment Network. So you choose one country that you want your inventory to be located in, and then you could sell. So let's say we choose the UK. You then want to sell your products in Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. You can do that. You can list all your products on those different websites as well. And when a customer places an order, it will be Prime eligible to the customer. Amazon take that inventory from the UK and ship that product directly to the customer, for example, in Spain. Mm-hmm. So that's called the European Fulfillment Network. Now, you as a seller would have to pay a cross-border fee because, of course, there's that cost of shipping the product from the UK to Spain. And the customer would have to wait a couple more days. It's not necessarily next day, but that's a great way of just keeping costs down by having your inventory in one location. And I'll explain more about the reason why it keeps your costs down, having inventory in one location in a bit. So EFN, you've then got what they call pan-European fulfillment. So this is a term that's used a lot, and Amazon are always going on about pan-European fulfillment. This is when you basically send your inventory to one location, and Amazon, using their intelligence, decides on where to relocate and redistribute that inventory into all the different countries. Not only is it the 5 countries or 6 now, it's also Poland and Czech Republic, because they have warehouses there. So they basically decide based on customer demand where the product should be scattered across Europe. So which means that your inventory is basically going to be everywhere. It's going to be Prime eligible. It's going to be next day. Really, that's a fantastic solution for the customer. And then you've got this multi-country inventory, which is kind of like a mid one between European Fulfillment Network and Pan-European, where you decide which countries. So let's say Germany and the UK, these are the biggest markets in Europe. So if you're considering selling into Europe or expanding in Europe, they're probably the best marketplaces that you go for first, given the size. You might just want to have inventory in these 2 countries. And then you can still sell in France, Italy, and Spain. And when the customer places the order, the inventory is taken either from Germany or the UK and then sent to each of those countries. So then you're not paying a cross-border fee for Germany or the UK because they're the biggest countries. So you want to have inventory in them, have next day delivery. But because France, Italy, and Spain, maybe the markets aren't as big, then it makes more sense to pay a cross-border fee than to start having your inventory loaded in those countries.
And Karina, does it get to a stage where the business is big enough in a country like France, Italy, or Spain where it actually makes more commercial sense for you to consider having permanent stock in those countries rather than always paying that cross-border fee?
Yeah, and this is the biggest thing as to why, because really pan-European is the best option, really.
Okay.
But the reason why it isn't a great option, best option for the customer, let's say, the best option for the seller, it's not so fantastic because you've got this whole compliance, VAT compliance, as in, and I just want to be clear, I am definitely not a VAT specialist. I've got to do my waiver to make sure that I'm not liable here. So please, if you are looking to sell in Europe, make sure that you do speak to a tax advisor. However, we do know that if you're holding inventory in a certain country, you then become obligated to pay VAT within that country. So if you're selling and you're doing pan-European, you're already in 7 countries. You need to then be VAT registered and file taxes for all those countries. And all those countries have a different way of filing. Some you need fiscal presence, some you don't. Some are a lot easier than others, and it gets complicated. And so if you know that the biggest business is huge, you know you're going to cover those costs. But if you're starting off small, that's a big cost and a big investment where you don't know if you're going to see that demand, which is why people probably start off, the smaller businesses start off with EFN or multi-country with Germany and the UK, let's say, because, you know, that's the safer option to start with.
So fulfillment is something that we've just covered in a few minutes, but again, you could talk about it for a while, and actually the right strategy for you as a brand owner will vary from someone else. So actually it's something that we may touch on again in greater detail, but I think you've done a great job, Karina, of highlighting your kind of 3 main options, key considerations for that. And there's a wealth of content on all these options as well. So I think it's quite easy for you to even just go and read about it on Google and see what some brands have picked and what some brands have used. So that makes sense. So let's say you've got your fulfillment strategy, you're happy with that. What importance does language play in this process?
So language is a huge thing. And I always get asked this question as in machine type, automated type translation versus manual translation. And there's obviously the big difference here is everybody knows that the manual native translation is going to be better than the automated machine-based one. That's standard. But there's obviously a big cost difference. And so a lot of businesses go with the machine-based translation to save on costs.
Sure.
Now, that works to some extent, but you're never going to get a truly optimized listing by using it machine-based, because that is basically taking exactly those words and translating it. It's not putting it into context. It's not running any keyword research. And so there could be a huge missed opportunity there. And so this is when it comes into this whole going with a native translator, that a certified translator, because a lot of people say, oh, I speak that language, that makes me a translator. It doesn't. You want to go with someone that knows how to translate. And what they do is they will run keyword research, understand the major keywords, translate that content, adjust that content based on keywords, but also adjust that content to what we call localization. So making sure that the translation still makes sense to actually a native speaker within that marketplace. And the tone changes, because sometimes the way we speak in one country is not how we address things in other countries. And so that's what the translator would do, which is missed when you do a machine-based translation.
I think some of the questions that brands will have is, well, translation, when we've priced it up, is quite expensive. We'll take the cheaper option. And actually, what you end up doing is annoying the customer, because it doesn't take tone of voice into consideration. And as you said, it doesn't take context into consideration. So, you can go on products that have been automatically translated on Amazon. You can go into those pages, and actually sometimes the reviews, point that out from the customer that, they're a little, like, for example, we know it's a natural thing. If you're German, French, Italian, Spanish, you not only want the pages in that language, but also ideally the packaging, because you would get a
Completely.
little annoyed that this company hasn't really invested in the Italian market. They're not that interested in us. And so that can actually annoy customers and go against you. So I think our consensus is that translation, depending on your product range, how many you have, but translation is something that you don't want to cut corners on, because once you've got a good solid foundation in place, that's fine if you're refreshing the content once or twice a year, but you really do need the groundwork in there first of all, don't you?
Yeah, completely. And it might not be, if you've got a huge product range,
Yeah.
then you might want to think about just taking a couple of lines, seeing the impact on that, and then moving over. It's not to say that you need to do everything. If you're just starting out, you might just do a batch of machine based and then gradually move everything over to manual. So there are ways to do it depending on your budget, definitely.
Cool. So you've got fulfillment ticked off, you're happy with that. You then have a strategy in place that's going to make sure your content is retail ready in those countries almost.
Yeah.
And then really the next big thing is something that we probably all dread and don't really know a lot about until we have to pick it up: compliance. What are the key considerations for compliance when moving into Europe?
Yeah, so Europe can be quite complex because you've got certain European legislation and then you've got certain country legislation as well. And so you need to be very clear that the products that you are selling are compliant for Europe, are compliant for that marketplace. And that can be, every product's different. So you're going to have, if you're selling a food-based product, you're going to have a lot more requirements than if you're selling basically a non-food, more generic, an item that's not probably going to cause much danger because it's not ingested.
Sure.
But then you've got some products, electronics and toys, that they need the CE marking. And a lot of these requests aren't things necessarily, if you're looking to expand from the US, you probably don't have some of these certifications. So it's really important that you do your research and work with a company that is able to advise you on what you need when it comes to labeling in Europe as well. And I think you also touched on something as well, as in, like the packaging and that. Some product lines do require the packaging and everything to be in that language as a compliance. It's by law, you need a label in German, for example, or in French. And so it's important that you do that. Now, there's an interesting question I got actually asked this week, and I've got asked it loads. Yeah, but loads of sellers are already selling items, but I never see labels in other languages or anything. And it's true, there is this point where you could probably get away with it, right? Where it's not necessarily being checked. But what you need to then ask yourself the question is, the reason these laws are in place and product compliance is in place is to protect the customer. And you need to be thinking about the customer. So even if you feel that you could start selling an item, yet the packaging should be in that language, if you don't, you're impacting that customer experience. And as you mentioned earlier, a negative review, your product could get pulled on Amazon. It's not worth it. Do it the right way. Make sure that it's compliant.
Yeah. If you're putting this effort and money into going into Europe, just do it properly. Follow the book. Don't cut corners, because we've seen sellers actually have their account suspended, and actually Amazon's been more or less 100% of their revenue. So that's problematic. It's really about, when trading on any marketplace, never mind just Amazon, it's about minimizing your risk for stuff to go wrong. And to be honest with you, account suspension typically happens because a seller hasn't followed a certain procedure or hasn't got the right paperwork in place. So it's really important that even if it does take you a bit longer to get all of that in place, and it is preventing you from making money in those countries, trust me, in the long term, it's going to serve you far better, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this kind of ties into the compliance, but the other one I had in my head was VAT.
Yes.
Again, differs on a per country basis, but where does that kind of fall into the mix?
Yeah, so a lot of that is whether or not you have to be signed up to pay VAT in a certain country. So it sort of comes back to the whole fulfillment, as in where is your inventory held, and also there's certain thresholds that you are able to sell within. So when it comes to VAT, you definitely need to make sure, especially if you're a US seller coming to sell to Europe, you need to make sure you're VAT compliant. But also, if you're importing product into the country, you're going to need an EORI number, which comes when you start registering with your VAT.
Karina, I'm going to test you. Can you remember what that stands for as an acronym?
No. European. I can't at all.
It's all right. I'm only testing you.
No, but that you know what's going to happen. Google after this, and then I'm going to figure out what it stands for.
Yeah.
But so you're going to need all of that. So you do need to make sure that you do speak to a tax advisor, and most VAT companies will be able to cover you for all different countries within Europe as well. If they don't do it, they know someone else that does it. So there's a couple of things that you need to want before even your inventory, or once you've defined your inventory strategy, is ticking the box for that you make sure you're compliant on the right product, and then VAT as well.
So it's quite a lot there to shift through, and you're probably thinking as a seller, do I need to hire independent specialists for each of those 4 previous points? So, I mean, our thought, and Karina and I had a little discussion about this earlier, as our own, as agency owners, Sky High Media and e-commerce nurse, we are not specialists in all these areas, but where we can help brands is we know specialists in those areas, and we can say, right, well, this is a type of company that you would want to pick that conversation up. What's also important is that you do these things at the right time. There's no point sorting out VAT and compliance until you've worked out your fulfillment strategy and getting the basics around translation sorted. Do it in stages. So that's the benefits of having a strong e-commerce consultancy helping you with that process. And they should be very honest with you of what they can and can't do. And you have to be careful of that. Again, we've worked with clients in the past that have said previous partnerships, they said they could do it. They struggled to do it. We wasted 3 months, 6 months, and went round in circles. So I think it's really important, if you are ever considering moving into Europe and partnering up, making sure that you understand what part each player can play, what part each partner can play in that role as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many companies out there, and that can also be quite overwhelming as well. Many are freight forwarders, companies out there that offer, their VAT services and that. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, by all means, get in touch with us, because we do have, as Mark said, we've got contacts. We know who, we've experienced lots. We know who does a fantastic job. And so we can help steer you in that right direction.
Yeah. And then the final key consideration I have is providing all that goes relatively smoothly across the board, and you're ready to sell. How does advertising work? There's a lot of questions in the marketplace about how do I run advertising? How do I drive people to my pages? I'm used to doing it in the UK, but how do I do it in France? Is there an automatic translation service? So on and so forth. So from an advertising perspective, you still have the same platforms available, whether it's Amazon DSP, sponsored advertising. And if you're a seller, those marketplaces will live in the new Amazon advertising console. So it's fairly easy for you to access all of your advertising accounts. You will, when you go into any of the, like say if you go into the Italian account, it will be in Italian, and you can use Google Chrome to translate it, albeit you start to get little bugs in place that make certain filtering options difficult. But you should, we're not here to talk about advertising strategy, but running ads in those countries would be the same as what you did in your primary market. So if you're just launching in those countries, you're thinking of a launch strategy, you'll follow the same procedure. Most of the formats are available across all of these countries. The reporting is consistent, so that's fairly good, and it's fairly easy to start driving traffic to it. Key consideration, actually, an update that came through to us as an agency this week from Amazon directly was that the sponsored brands format, the banners that you see on the page, now offer a level of automatic translation, which is great to see. Now, I still would take that with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't just rely on it, But if you have a fairly generic phrase that you're using in your tagline of up to 50 characters, there is the ability now to convert that into several languages. It's still fairly basic, but that's a sign that's showing that, you know, Amazon is trying to improve the efficiency of its platforms. Translation's a big thing for people. Again, if you don't really have relationships with certified translators, it's just another task that you're thinking, oh, I need to find one, and how much is it going to cost me just to translate one tagline in one country for 5 different markets, 6 different markets. So that's really exciting to see. But again, just like you did in your primary market, one step at a time. You probably don't want to launch all markets at the same time. If you are going into 4 or 5, you want to do it one market at a time, get a feel, because every market's different. The search demand's different, the audiences will be slightly different, so you want to get a feel. And I think what's really important is that unless, you know, if you have really taken the consideration of having your packaging translated as well, it would be unfair to think that those markets will reach the heights of your primary market as quickly as your primary market.
Yeah.
So you do need a level of patience when running advertising abroad.
And would you say it's important to be a native speaker managing those ads, or at least have some kind of native involvement?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, any translation type of software right now, we're just not in an age where it's good enough or reliable enough. And we work with tons of brands, and we've seen cases, particularly off the back of the COVID-19 situation, where Amazon was recommending some really strange keywords for certain categories, and you can kind of work out how they might have got there, like the customer, but you wouldn't want to advertise these keywords as an example because they're just too far-fetched and they're really not related. And so it's important that you do have some type of fluent native speaker, ideally. If not that, fluent is the next best option, because each market will need a different level of attention. So you'll just improve your conversion rate if you do that. I'm not saying it's crucial, but you'll just improve your conversion rate.
Completely.
So yeah, I would say we very quickly, as the title suggests, the virtual coffee break, covered 5 kind of core areas for selling on Amazon in Europe as a seller. Now, Karina, it's worth pointing out and summarising for the end of our chat here. There are some differences from a vendor side of things, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's why we decided to focus more on the seller, because it is slightly different. And the tax, because tax is a bit different, compliance remains the same, but translation remains the same. But Amazon works quite differently, and their European fulfillment network works slightly differently. So we can cover that off in our next session and talk about what those differences are if you're looking to sell as a vendor in Europe or expand, or maybe Amazon has already expanded your business in Europe without you realizing.
Yeah, that's a good topic. We have to cover that because there's some good stories of brands being surprised around that. So
wow, I'm on Spain. Yep.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Brilliant. Okay, cool. All right, so episode 7 is already geared up, so we'll more or less cover the same topic, but for vendors. Thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. Of course, please like our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel. We have been getting some private messages from brands asking us to cover certain subjects, so Karina and I will continue collating that data and trying to curate our content in line with that. But please do get in touch, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.